All right. Right on the board because this is the word you need to know. It's the only thing we're talking about today and this week.
That word in cobalt.
That is amazing penmanship. Inchoate. Inchoate. So inchoate. Anybody read the chapter? Know ish what that means? Would you figure out?
That is about the crime that's beginning to happen. It's not a bill.
Right. So we judge. She said the crime is beginning to happen. So we judge inchoate crimes by whether or not they're finished or not. So we have a few different ways where inchoate crimes can occur, or ways we define them, or categories they fall into. But all of them result in crimes that didn't necessarily finish. So we have the most obvious of those would be attempts. We talked about a little bit in class, attempts before. What do we say? I think we talked about attempt battery, right? We say we don't really have an attempt battery because that's what?
Thinking about.
Right, so we converge the thought and the action of battery. So if I'm on a swing and miss, that would be me trying to batter you. That'd be an assault. So some attempt crimes have their own definition like that, but a lot of other crimes. So if I'm going to most obvious attempt murder. If you shoot at somebody and miss, you didn't complete the crime of murder. Like you said, you started it, you did something, and we're going to talk about exactly how much you need to do in order for it to fit that category of an attempt, but that's going to be your attempt crimes. We're also going to talk about this week conspiracy, which is just getting together and planning crimes, but not necessarily whole and not completing them. There's going to be some steps you need to go through, because we already said that what we talked about is thinking about a crime. If you just have the mens rea without the actus reus, it's not a crime. You have to have both. So we're going to talk about how conspiracy, which is essentially just planning, kind of talking, how that becomes a crime.
Is that why the police say, nothing happened yet, so we can't do anything? And you know that something's about to happen, and that's so hard. They talked about it in the book a little bit, but that's so hard when somebody's after me, so that my boyfriend is trying to hurt me, and I go, but he didn't do anything yet, so we can't do anything. So now I gotta wait to get hurt or get beat up, get killed until they could do something.
That is a little bit of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, I'll use some examples from undercover work and things like that, because the vast majority of undercover investigations don't result in an immediate arrest. As I've explained, undercover work isn't necessarily what you see on TV, but sometimes it is a little bit of what you see on TV. The basis of it is that, and we're going to talk about that. But essentially, very, very, very rarely in an undercover investigation is somebody going to pop up in the middle of a crime and say, "Ha ha, gotcha." No, somebody's going to finish that crime.
In the book, it says the earlier that the police intervene, the crime is going to happen, and that's what we should be working on, prevention.
Yeah, well, there's different avenues of approach for crime prevention. Sometimes crime prevention comes from incapacitation or protecting the public from future crime and things like that. It's a cost benefit, and sure, sometimes you can arrest somebody for a minor crime or an attempt crime, and that will result in very little exposure. Who remembers what exposure is? How much time you get in prison? How much time you can get in jail or prison?
1 year, 1 month.
Right. Well, that for a felony, yes. So you make that cost benefit. Is it better to wait until a more serious crime is committed so that person can be locked up for a more serious crime as opposed to a lesser attempt? And we're gonna talk about the exposure for attempts. And that's the conspiracy aspect of things. And then we're gonna finally talk about solicitation, which has some relation to conspiracy, but it's its own standalone definition. So first things first, we'll talk about attempts. So I've told you what an attempt battery is. An assault is an attempt battery. Why don't we extrapolate? How would we define our own? If we're going to make our own definition, of an attempted crime, what do we need?
They have to prepare for the crime and do some type of act or be in the area where they have committed this crime.
In the area, yeah.
Some type of clues that suggest that there is a crime they're going to commit.
What did you say, some type of clothes?
Clues.
Oh, clues,
like,
I'm sorry.
You
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
they have a weapon with them and they're walking into it, and that's a clear sign. They're probably not coming just to 10 o'clock.
Right, so.
And the intention to act on. it.
So we've gone over, I think, 2 or 3 different ways to define a crime. We're gonna go over another different way today. And not necessarily how to define a crime, but how to build one, how to know that somebody's going to commit a crime. 6 steps you may have seen, and in fact, if you want to follow along, I'll give it to you. It's gonna be on page 105. Joshua Dressler, he is a professor of criminology at Ohio State University. He came up with a really detailed description, a list of things on the bottom of that page that tell you exactly how one goes about committing a crime. The first thing is that you have to conceive the idea. So we can't have a crime, we have to have the mens rea, the thought. And not necessarily in this case, he's not necessarily thinking the thought of how to do it, but just the idea. Like if you took criminology already, or if you're taking this semester, you know that if you're gonna do a study, you have to have an idea of what you want to study. The same thing when it comes to breaking the law. You have to have an idea of what law you want to break. And you may not think of it in those terms. You might think, okay, I need to break the law today. What am I gonna break? No, it could be a heat of the passion thing. It could be you're broke and you gotta do something, or even just a knee-jerk reaction. But even in that knee-jerk reaction, there's going to be these steps. So you've got to figure out what it is you're going to do. If I want this remote control, I've got to think I want this remote control. If it's not mine. Then you're gonna figure out like what exactly it's going to take for that crime to take for me to get that remote control. Evaluate the idea is the second step. So you're gonna go in your mind, and again, this even applies to knee-jerk because it's just very quickly evaluating the idea. And then I've got to form the intent to act, because we said most crimes are going to be intent-based crimes. You have to have not just the actus reus, the act of the crime, but the mens rea, the intent to commit that crime. So I've got to think, okay, I want that. How do I get it? I need to walk over here and do it. Okay, that's what I'll do. I'll walk over there, and when I get there, I'm going to take that remote control. Then we need to prepare, like you said, prepare for the crime, whatever it is. It could be a detailed crime where, you mentioned school shooting or burglary or something like that, where you need to get the right clothing, wait for the right time of day, watch the place to see what time folks leave. Or it could be, I need to put my shoes on so I can walk over there and get that remote control. But any type of preparation that's necessary to commit that crime is going to be that 4th step. But then it's time to fish or cut bait. Right? We gotta act, and that's begin the act of taking this. So if that's my crime, that remote control. So I do all my planning, I come up with the idea, I conceive the idea, and I know I have the intent to take that remote control when I get over there. You tell me when I begin the crime. Right. Have I begun now?
When you prepare.
Could be when I'm prepared. But when I'm preparing, have I acted?
No.
Is there body
Oh,
movement?
yes, you acted, yes.
Sure.
Yes.
So we have a little bit of a controversy, a little bit of a gray area, actually, when the crime occurs. At what point have I stolen that remote control yet?
Not yet.
So we don't have the actual crime of theft. Then I'll back up. Do I have a crime?
You have a crime.
Yeah, do I have a crime? If I haven't stolen that yet, so I can't be arrested. There's no crime of stealing that remote control yet. When I started thinking and preparing, or excuse me, when I started thinking and then I started preparing, I put my shoes on. I had body movement, right? But is putting shoes on necessarily indicative of stealing? So maybe the crime hasn't necessarily. But what about when I started walking over here?
It's intent.
Yeah, and now I'm here. And then Christiana Marie sees me and I'm like, oh. I started to reach for it, but I'm not trying to get caught. What do you think? Have I committed any crimes yet?
No,
Okay, we're gonna get back to that.
I don't think.
Don't let me forget to get back to that, because that point right there is what we're gonna talk about for the next 20 minutes or so. That right here, get ready to take it. Because she's the police and I'm not trying to go to jail. So the final step to break the law, to committing a crime, is finishing the action. So in this story, I have yet to finish the action. But to make things simple, take away the gray area, because we don't always want a gray area in class discussions. Now I've taken it and I walk away with the intent to permanently deprive. Can we agree now a crime has occurred?
Yes.
Sure. Exactly. No gray area in that last step. Gray area when it comes to attempts. So we're going to try to make it as less gray, as least gray as possible. One thing I want you to remember about inchoate crimes when it comes to definitions and tests and remembering words is not only you need to absolutely know that and recognize it in the test, but another word for that is anticipatory crimes or anticipatory offenses. So you may see those interchangeable. Anticipatory offenses could either be attempts, conspiracy, or solicitation. Solicitation. Those are the three inchoate offenses that we have. So you talked about intervening. So usually the exposure for an attempt is going to be determined by how deep we get into this attempt. So we've got, to one extreme, we've got me grabbing this remote control, and then the police see me and I walk away. Did I take that remote control with the intent to permanently deprive?
No.
So we don't, can we agree we don't have theft here?
Yeah.
But I came really close to doing it. Whereas, I'm putting shoes on, preparing, I have a plan, and I start to walk over, and then I see the police. We'll talk about at what point necessarily that becomes an attempt, but for the sake of argument, we'll stipulate that this is an attempt. I got a lot less deep into this attempt than I did when I had my hands on somebody else's property. If I plan, we talk about solicitation and conspiracy. So I'm sitting in there, I talk to a hitman and I give a hitman some money and I say, hey, here's some money, go kill so-and-so. And then they start to go kill so-and-so, or excuse me, they were in the bar talking and then the police over here said we get arrested. So we'll say that may be an attempt because I made an attempt to kill somebody, as opposed to if I go out myself or I let that plan go and the hitman goes and shoots at that victim and misses, still an attempt murder, but one got a lot farther into it. And that's why the exposure is going to be a little bit different, usually in most jurisdictions, depending on how deep into that plan you get.
Would that be kind of conspiracy too?
Yes. So there's going to be a murder in these crimes. And we're also going to talk about how you can still be charged with more than one offense. And we've said that before. We talked about how can I be charged with murder and attempt murder, or can I be charged with assault and battery, things like that. So, this guy, he talked about the police getting involved. So if we know that the exposure is going to be greater if the deeper into that attempt we get, is there a benefit in allowing that attempt to get deeper? Is there a benefit for society or the police?
For society,
Either one. I'll give you the choice. Is there a benefit?
can we remove that, deviant person out of society, but at what cost?
Yeah. So, we could take it to the extreme. If you know that this, using the same example, there's somebody's going to order a hit on a victim and the police find out about it and allow that hit to take place. Is there even more exposure for the suspects of this crime now that the police let the victim get killed? Sure, yeah. Now we have a murder. That person's going to go away for probably for life if there's a successful prosecution. But like you said, at what cost? Is it right to let somebody die so that you can have a greater exposure in prison and in the prosecution? No. I would venture to say no.
I mean, I feel like there's so many resources for things like that.
Like what?
If we're talking about a person who's being abused in a relationship or feels like they're in danger for their life, there's restraining orders, houses, people to go to, there's so many different resources, something like if you have somebody in that situation, you would give them help.
Sure.
So that we can.
In reality, yeah, if we're not talking about the legality, the legal aspects of things, the criminal aspect of it, absolutely. But when we're talking about prosecution or avoiding a successful defense, because that's the more likely scenario. So I use the extreme example of somebody getting murdered. It's in reality, are the police really going to let somebody get murdered? I use that as an extreme example for classroom purposes. It's not going to happen. However, we'll come back to my my stealing scenario, where I said, okay, I was over here, I was planning it, I knew what I was going to do, I had the intent, I started putting on my shoes, and somehow the police know, they find out, and they watch me put on my shoes.
We gotta be solicited.
The police just know. So the police know, somehow they know. They're watching me and they say, haha, we know he's getting ready to steal that remote control. And he just put his shoes on, movement, right? And they swoop and arrest me. Compare that scenario to if they were watching me put on my shoes and then they watch me get my keys and then they watch me go out the door and then they watch me start my car. I start driving towards the remote control and they follow me and they follow me and they wait until I go into the room where the classroom where the remote control is, and then I start walking to the podium where the remote control is, and then I start reaching for it, and then they jump out and grab it. Of those two scenarios, where one I was just start putting on my shoes, movement, I had intent, I had movement. In theory, we can call that a crime. Am I going to be more successful in my defense when I was just putting my shoes on, or when they had me all the way over there reaching for the remote control? That's going to be a more difficult defense for me. So that is the cost benefit. To lose a case, to be able to prove a case, the gray area gets a lot more gray over here. And it's a lot more black and white over here. So if you want a successful prosecution or a successful case, it's a lot easier to intervene later in the attempt. A, because of the exposure, and B, because of the ease of the prosecution, because it's a lot harder for me to give a defense for coming into the classroom, going over and grabbing that remote control than it is way over here, but I was just put my shoes on, what else? Going to the store here. How do you know? And having to prove that they knew my mindset and whatever evidence they had to show. The evidence to show that I was committing that crime is a lot less when I was over here than when I was over here. And that's why you'll see the intervention oftentimes come a lot later in the crime. All right, so for an attempt, so as we start to define attempts. So we need a crime to be attempted. That's the very first thing we need in our shopping list. Whether in this case it's a theft, we also use murder, shooting, hiring a hitman. You need something. You have to have a crime that already exists, not an attemptable only crime. So somehow you're not going to see, most jurisdictions are not going to have an attempt crime for every crime. You're not going to have murder, and then there's a penal code for attempt murder, like 186.5 or something. You know, it doesn't work that way. All you're going to have in most jurisdictions is you're going to have murder, robbery, assault with a deadly weapon. You're going to have all these different crimes, and then one crime in the books that just says it's illegal to attempt to do any of those. Just to follow the example, in California, then you don't need to know any of these. So in California, if you're going to be charged with a crime of attempt anything, it's going to be 664, whatever that crime was. So if you're charged with 187, you're charged with murder, or you could be charged with 664, 187, attempted murder, attempted robbery, attempted ADW. Most jurisdictions, the vast majority of jurisdictions have a definition for what it takes to attempt a crime. But I didn't make it clear you don't need to know any of those numbers. So we already said that just merely thinking about a crime is not enough to be a crime. We have to have more than the mens rea. We have to have the actus reus. So what have we said in these examples? I gave a lot of examples. What have we done to, in an attempt, what have we done to fulfill the actus reus?
Prepare, start, well, like, with your right, start walking towards it and you can that.
Yeah, there we go. Preparation is part of that. You can, I mean, planning can be part of it, but as we said, the planning aspect puts us over here in the more defensible position than waiting for the acting and the preparation.
I have a question.
I'm sorry. So,
It was just funny because I was reading this right when I wanted about it, but this says that courts have held that mere preparation to commit an offense is not sufficient to support a charge of attempted criminal activity, and that some specific action must be taken toward the actual completion of the intended offense.
exactly. So what she said was mere preparation. So you thought about it, and so we're sitting at home, and I'm thinking, okay, what I'm going to do is tomorrow I'm going to cancel my doctor's appointment so I can have time to steal that. And I just sit there and I'm preparing. Mere preparation alone, not enough. Because we have no actus reus yet, right? I've just sat there and prepared.
So is that
So-
referred to like mental preparation?
Sure, yeah, without the actus reus. And then you need also to have a step towards the crime, which is the very next, the next point. So you got your preparations, you're making, even if you're moving, you called the doctor, you canceled your doctor's appointment, you got a list. Or in some cases, even leaving the house, your body is still moving to leave the house, and I'm scoping out this building. That's still in the preparation phase, and I haven't necessarily acted. Now we're getting a little more gray because you have some movement. But at what point in that story with the remote control, like you're saying, so I'm over here, I planned, I canceled my doctor's appointment, I made my list of what I need, and I came here.
That list.
The list is super gray, but it could be considered that list. It could be when I drove here, because now I'm not just preparing, I'm doing. But if you want to get to the least gray of those attempts, at some point I start stepping towards that. And I've made an overt act. Overt act. And that's when we stop preparing, we start doing. In the world of attempts, at some point, you got to stop talking about it and start being about it. So that is when you start being about it. So back to her example of mere preparation. Because it takes more than, that's why I keep saying it's a gray area. When I started calling the doctor's office, did my body move? Sure. When I made that list, did my body move, or am I still preparing? Even when I left the house, there's a term that I need you to remember for that goes in conjunction with the preparation. And that's a substantial act. You need not just any act, a substantial act. So in all those plans, and again, these are great. So you tell me, when I canceled my doctor's appointment, I had to pick up the phone. When I made the list of plans, my body was moving. When I put my shoes on, my body moved. At any point there, did I make a substantial act towards that?
No.
And I'll skip all the way forward for the sake of grayness. And when I was right here and I took a step towards this, is that a substantial act?
Yes.
There we go. And that's where mere planning alone, not enough. And even in a lot of cases, that actus reus, the body movement, we said any movement of the body can complete that convergence for a crime. For an attempt, it's a little bit different. Because we said any movement to commit a crime, but we need a substantial movement. Because all these movements, shoes, I can put on shoes all day long. It's amazing, right? It's a defensible act. I know I was putting my shoes on to go steal that, but I was still in the planning phase. Right. Not what you know is what you can prove, somebody once said. That's why when it comes to that you need that substantial act. That's why you'll see law enforcement waiting and waiting and waiting because they want that substantial act, not just the planning. Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say, so would it be better to actually let you grab from the rug and then start walking away?
That is a a question for the undercover, or not in that case undercover, for the investigator, for the prosecutor. You would have to, that's the cost benefit analysis as an investigator, as a law enforcement officer, you have to determine. Because in this case, is he even really gonna get hurt if you let me take this? Probably not.
I feel like
But
you're
there's
saying
a-
like, oh, it's looking there.
Sure, you can say that, it's defensible.
So like, but if you actually grab it, start walking away,
Less defensible.
yeah.
The farther you get into that crime, the more exposure to prosecution and successful prosecution will occur. However, now you look at that as a different crime. What if that is a Fabergé egg, which I hear are expensive? And then if you want to let me grab that and then you snatch me up and I drop the egg, and then whoever owns that is like, well, thanks a lot for stopping them from stealing my egg, but you broke it. Like, and it's such a cost benefit analysis when to stop that crime.
That's some real, determination for the officer or the, undercover to make this determination. Because, you got people, you got lives in jeopardy, you got, situations, that might happen. So that's a heavy reliance on that, officer.
There's a lot, I mean, cost benefit in undercover work or just in police work in general, investigations are going to involve a lot of cost and benefit. You are making a rational choice. You heard me say that when it comes to criminality, making a rational choice when not to commit a crime as an officer or as a supervisor in a law enforcement capacity, when to tell your folks or allow your folks to act. Because what if you stop me before I grab this, if the police came in right as I was reaching for this, what is my most likely reaction going to be? Just turn around, I don't do anything. And now we've already decided that I made a substantial act, and we all know that I'm still going to jail, right? However, is my reaction as a suspect going to be different if the police let me pick it up, put it in my pocket, and then they snatch me? Is there more likelihood of a fight? Somebody getting hurt, the suspect getting hurt, which could cause liability, one of the officers getting hurt. So again, cost benefit. At what point is it best? Where do you gain the most? Through exposure, through successful prosecution, and through lack of civil liability. At what point is the best point? I can't tell you. As a supervisor in the LAPD, I knew where my point was, but it changed with each investigation. If we were infiltrating an underground casino, then maybe I would allow that crime to go on, because is anybody's life in danger unduly by allowing my undercover investigators to continue infiltrating that a few more times? Really, they're probably not going to get hurt outside of the understandable danger by going in and making friends or doing whatever it takes to infiltrate. However, you change that investigation to the crime that we talked about, where solicitation of murder. At some point, I need to stop that crime before it happens, right?
Yeah.
Sooner than other crimes. So I don't always, as a supervisor, I didn't always have, my point isn't always the same on the timeline. If this is our time, this is planning, and this is doing, sometimes if it's dangerous, you're gonna intervene here. Other times, if it's not as, the cost doesn't outweigh the benefit, you might be able to let the suspect come all the way here. Or like you said, maybe we let them all go all the way to commit the crime. Maybe.
It's murder.
But if it's murder, then no. That's where every crime is different. This is the timeline of all crimes. Stealing remote control, maybe we let them do it. Planning a murder, probably gonna stop it a lot sooner than later.
Is solicitation, an act?
Solicitation is one of the 3 inchoate crimes that we're gonna discuss this week.
That's just basically convincing somebody else to commit a crime, right?
In general,
Sounds like conspiracy too.
Yeah.
it does.
It kind of gets confusing.
Walk with me, baby birds. Walk with me. I'll feed you. All right. The story's in the book, but I wanted to share it with you. So the Rizzo case. I think it's Rizzo v. New York or New York v. Rizzo. People v. Rizzo. So four guys got a great idea that they're going to rob somebody. They know he works at a place. He's got some cash. He does a deposit. And they know what he wears. One of them really knows what he looks like. He's like, check it out. Come with me, baby bird. Come with me, you three. Let's rob this guy. I'll tell you what he looks like. I don't know exactly where he works, but I know he's in this neighborhood. He's always got a cash of money. He's always got a bag of cash on Tuesday night. They all jump in the car. Have they planned?
Yes.
Yeah. So they drive around and drive around and drive around, and they can't find him. They funny. Then the police see him driving around, and they're like, "Well, these guys are really weird. They keep driving in circles. Let's stop these guys." They did an investigation. I don't know the details exactly how they were able to show it, but they found out that these four were fixing to rob somebody. They found out who they were going to rob, and they all got arrested. They went to trial for attempted robbery, and they got convicted. Attempted robbery. They planned. They made an act. They made a significant step towards that act, right?
Yeah, that's crazy because the guy in the story, the guy never showed up.
Right. So they appealed, and the appellate courts, I believe they actually lost in the first appeal. The second appeal made a statement saying that all they did merely by driving around, that didn't count as a substantial act because they never got to the guy. It was only mere preparation. Driving around was preparing for the robbery. So I use the example, putting on my shoes and getting in the car as a preparation act, calling the doctor to cancel my appointment, make a list. These guys did a lot more. They jumped in the car and they actually started looking for this guy. But the courts upheld that if you couldn't find him, you couldn't make a substantial act. At some point for a robbery, what do we say we need for a robbery? What are the elements of a robbery? Ish. You got to take somebody else's property, right? Through what?
Without the intention of giving it back.
Without the intention of getting it back, but you need something more than a theft. It's robbery now. So what do we need?
The action.
Force or fear. Right. We need to take somebody else's property through the use of force or fear. So at this point, this guy's name, I don't even know if his name is in the book. Our victim, our potential victim, was he scared at any point?
No.
I wasn't even there. So the court upheld that wasn't enough. We didn't have enough of a substantial act. They called the driver out mere preparation. In fact, I think the rest of that story is, come to find out, he wasn't even there that day. He didn't do a money drop that day. So they couldn't get it. Even if they wanted to, which they did, if they wanted to get to do a substantial step towards that crime, in this specific case, which probably helped them overturn that case, was the fact that that guy wasn't even there that day. There's no way that crime could have been committed. They wanted to.
That's how, didn't the higher court revert back to the lower court on that, because of the, circumstances?
I think in the initial, yeah, well, a lot of times what happens in appeals is they don't necessarily find you innocent or find you not guilty. They refer back for a new trial with losing some evidence. So yeah, you'll see a lot of times courts will, as you win an appeal, you appeal a very specific portion of that case. And because you're only appealing a specific portion of the case, that appellate court's not gonna say, okay, well, now you're not guilty. No, they're gonna say, okay, you lose this aspect of the case. Now go retry the case without this piece, which sometimes is a very substantial piece. So I want to talk about how we determine the substantial step or substantial act. So there's a few tests. One, Christina Marie talked about being close. We have a proximity test. So how, and these are all overlapping. There's no one test to show exactly whether or not I've come close enough to attempt. It's going to be what a reasonable person believes, what a jury believes, whether the prosecutor feels like it could be tried. But one of the tests that we're going to talk about is a proximity test. So in my example of the remote control, it's a lot easier to show that this is an attempt like this, the proximity being how close you are. If I am right here next to it with my hand outstretched, I have a lot of proximity, right? Versus when I was over here and I just finished putting on my shoes and I just started walking over there. One is a lot easier to prove. So that's one way to show whether or not the attempt is valid. So there's two types of proximity, and there's a word that you'll hear as we talk about attempts more, and it's dangerous. Dangerously close is dangerous proximity. When the police busted in and I was right here reaching for it, was I dangerously close to taking this?
Yes.
Yeah. Heck yeah. So two ways. Also, literally, I was right next to it, so we have proximity, but we have dangerous proximity as well. So to separate those two, if we're go back to the murder with a rifle and a scope, and I'm looking at somebody on the other side of campus, and I'm in this window, and I'm propped in this window, and I've got my scope on the person that I'm going to shoot, and I have the crosshairs on them, and my finger is on the trigger, and my finger is starting to pull that trigger when the police bust in and grab me.
Dangerous
Did I have good proximity to that person? Was I right next to them?
Yes.
I wasn't.
No, but that's dangerous proximity.
I wasn't anywhere near them. They were 100 yards away. So I know, so remember I said all these tests have to, take them individually. So even though I wasn't physically within a good proximity of them, was I dangerously close to murdering them?
Yes.
Heck yeah.
Mhm.
So that's the dangerous proximity test. That's how you ask, and that is probably one of the more significant tests if we're going to determine whether or not an attempt has occurred. Were you or was the suspect dangerously close to completing that crime? In a burglary, were you going to make entry into a structure with the intent to commit a felony or a theft? If you walk to the door, you have the crowbar right at the door, and you got your hand on the handle to see if it's unlocked, and the police stop you. You were dangerously close to breaking into the house. You just got stopped. As opposed to going to different doors and checking them and checking them and checking them. You're not nearly as dangerously close to breaking into one of those places. You don't have a crowbar. See the difference. That is such a crucial term that I want you to remember. Dangerously close. That's how we determine whether somebody is making an attempt.
Because proximity is when you have to it's close or have the power to act immediately. But you, like with the guy with trying the doorknob, you didn't have nothing to get in, so that would imply danger.
Right. Was this the class we talked about with Randy and the air conditioner and okay, so who was the victim for that? Who almost got shot? Anybody? Yeah. So if I was shooting here and the air conditioner blew and a bullet curved this way and missed, was I still dangerously close to shooting somebody?
Yes.
Yeah. Even though I was way over here shooting and I didn't have proximity, I had dangerous proximity. So same concept. All right. Indispensable element. So that's part of the planning and the acting. If there was an indispensable element of acting in this attempt, something that can't be, it's indispensable, but also sometimes indefensible. If I have special remote control stealing gloves, that remote control is made out of metal, and I have magnet gloves. And there's really no reason for me to wear magnet gloves other than to steal something metal or to touch something metal. There's no real good reason. So I'm putting on my shoes. I still don't have a significant end. And I walk out the door. And right before I walk out the door, I grab my remote control stealing gloves and I start putting them on. And I haven't even reached for this one yet, and the police bust in and stop me. That indispensable act or indefensible act, it's very hard for me to explain why I would be putting on remote control stealing gloves if I wasn't going to steal a remote control. Did I? Did I steal a remote control yet? No. So we don't have theft.
In dangerous proximity.
But I was in dangerous proximity. But what if I back up and I don't have proximity to it? And even if I'm not necessarily dangerously close to taking it, I'm way over here. I'm still at home putting on my special remote control stealing gloves, and they stop me when I walk out of the house. We can kind of separate those different acts because I don't necessarily want to give you, in this story, I don't want to give you proximity and I want to give you dangerous proximity, but I want you to see that I did an indispensable act by putting on these special remote control stealing gloves. It is that makes that act so significant that it's hard for me to explain away why I would be putting on these gloves if I wasn't going to do that. That's why I like to use the term. That's not, indefensible act is not a legal term, but I use it to explain what an indispensable act is. So you will probably not see indefensible act on a test, but you will see indispensable, but just think that that's how significant that is. So very similar to that. You have the unequivocal test, but that goes into a lot of the planning aspects of things. Like maybe your planning is so detailed and you make a significant act towards it. So making a list, it's just, my intent is unequivocal, undeniable. I have told other people, I have made a list of exactly how I'm going to do it. And I put on dark clothing, because I know I'm gonna steal that at night. And then I leave the house. Unequivocally, I have that intent because I showed all those different signs. And then I made an act. I haven't necessarily gotten close proximity or dangerously close to doing it, but the intent is unequivocal. So very similar to that in the indispensable act, but more along the planning side of things. The other test that we have involves usually intervention with the police. Usually police are the most likely intervention method. So when you talk about probable distance, as I'm closing my distance, we talk about the had not rule from intent for committing a crime. Same thing here for attempts. Had not the police come in, would it was obvious that I was going to continue doing that, even though I hadn't gotten super close to it, even though I hadn't gotten danger close, proximity close, or put on my special stealing gloves or something like that. If it's obvious that every step I've taken towards that crime, and I was going to continue that path towards that crime if the police hadn't stopped me, then it meets that test. One more, last act. What stops an attempt from being a fulfilled crime?
Actually doing it.
Just the only difference between attempted stealing this and stealing it is this, right? That last act, the last thing I did turned it from an attempt to an actual completed crime. Not from an attempt to a crime, because attempt is a crime. So the last test we would say, if you're going to judge the entire totality of the circumstances, if we're looking at this crime, all these fact patterns, and we're trying to decide, okay, do we have enough for an attempted crime? That the 64 we talked about. Do we have enough? The one last test that we can run that through, one last scenario test we can run that through is, if we had let them do one last act, would the crime have been completed? So if my last act was going to be snatching the remote control, then yes. But if for some reason, my whole intention was to scare you into thinking I was going to take this, and my last act was just going to hit that and walk away, regardless of how you know that, because remember, a lot of times we talk about criminal law, you have to just accept that we're telling a truthful story here. If you can show that your last act was not going to be taking that item, then you don't have an attempt. The last act has to be the completion of that criminal behavior. So we'll go back to me being the suspect. The police bust in on whatever crime, we'll still use the remote control. I'll give you this example. Same thing, shoes, cancel the doctor's appointment, I'm coming to school, I'm gonna take that remote control. Or at least that's what it appears like. Police are watching, I get, what do we call this? Dangerously close? Yeah, I'm dangerously close. I also have proximity. Does it appear that if you let me take one more step, that I will complete that crime?
Yes.
Maybe I have some remote control stealing gloves on, but right as I'm reaching for that, I don't. And I walk this way, away from that door. And then the police come in and stop me.
Is that culpability?
What do you think? What do we have? I've told you the story. Accept the facts for what they are. What do we have? Is it easy for me, or is it It's easy for me to say I wasn't gonna take that remote control. That's always easy, right?
Yeah.
Is that a defense? Could I use that as a defense to say I wasn't gonna take that remote control?
But you got problems, cost.
Tell me more about that.
Like you were going to commit a crime, but then you did it, like you went the other direction.
Right. So abandonment, the key aspect of abandonment is when that intervention took place. So when I told the story, when did the police come in?
After you walked away.
After I abandoned that act, right? However, we can slightly change that story to, I'm reaching, the police bust in, and I walk away. Is that any different than the way I told it?
Yeah,
Why?
because it's dangerous proximity of taking.
And the intervention, exactly. I was dangerously close to taking it. I had proximity, I had danger proximity. It appeared that I had that last act test pass as well. I had some unequivocability involved in there. And when that intervention occurred, I was still in that act, like you were saying. However, a defense for attempt is if I abandon that act prior to the intervention. That's a huge difference in the way I told it the first time, the way we told it the second time. The first time, if you remember, I was doing it, and then I changed my mind, and then the intervention occurred. I wasn't going to do that anyway. So, when it comes to abandonment, now we come back to the gray area. We talk about police intervening, whether it be undercover or uniformed officers intervening at some point. If it were a street level drug deal and undercover officers try to buy narcotics, and then as they're making the negotiation, they have an agreement. Okay, I'll sell you $5 worth of my street level pharmaceuticals, and you will give me money. And then people jump out and arrest the seller. That seller could say, as a defense, I wasn't gonna sell. I knew this guy was a cop. I wasn't gonna do it. I never did it, right? So even though there wasn't necessarily the abandonment that we viewed, in the suspect's mind, maybe they'd already abandoned that. And that's why we say abandonment is a defense to attempts. It's a way that you can defend yourself in court, maybe not necessarily avoid being arrested. It's not always going to be as cut and dry as the way, you turn around, you physically abandon that crime and then you're at the intervention, but it's how you're going to tell your story in court. And if it's a defense versus an excuse, what would the outcome of a successful defense of abandonment be? So in court, exactly. Well, yeah, you're going to show you didn't commit the act. So in court, a successful excuse means you have a lowered penalty. A successful defense or alibi means what? Right, and if you're successful in proving that, not guilty. Exactly. So
Even though you had the gloves.
yeah, because is there a crime in owning? Well, maybe there are. But in general, is there a crime in owning special magnetic gloves? But it added to it. And is there a crime in putting on my shoes and walking over to the remote control necessarily in and of itself? If we take away the totality of the story, which is what defenses do, defenses take away the totality. Walking over to a remote control, is that against the law? And in general, by itself, reaching for it, I mean, now we're kind of, if it's not mine, now we're kind of getting towards it. It's very hard to defend that. And then we have abandonment. So this remote control is 2 tons. This remote control weighs as much as my truck for the purposes of this story. And I come in, I put my shoes on, I call the doctor, everything's the same. I cancel my appointments. I come in with whatever gloves I want to come in with. And I walk in to the classroom, nobody's here. And I reach around remote control, which is as big as my arms are right now. And I reach for it and I grab it and the police come in. And they arrest me. Did I have the unequivocability because I had those special gloves on? Was I dangerously close to taking that? Did I proximity? Did I? I touched it. What definition is theft? Taking away a property of another with the intent to permanently deprive. Did I take it away?
No.
Taking and carrying away, a lot of times is what a lot of jurisdictions will say. So remember, how much did that remote control weigh? 2 tons. Is there anybody in the classroom who thinks that me, Stephen, can lift 2 tons? So when the police came in, is it defensible for me to say, I wasn't gonna take that? In fact, I couldn't. What are you talking about, officer? That thing weighs 2 tons. You don't think I can lift 2 tons, do you, officer? Is that a defense to the attempt? Right. It is not possible for me to have committed that crime by myself the way I told it. So if there is a factual impossibility for me to complete that crime, doesn't mean there's not going to be an arrest, doesn't mean it's not probable cause to believe that somebody was going to try to commit that crime. But the idea in many jurisdictions is that no matter how hard you think you were going to be successful in committing that crime, if you couldn't have been, then you couldn't have committed the crime. So prosecuting somebody for thinking they were going to be successful isn't a possibility, if that makes sense. So I could think that's a 1 pound remote control. And so the whole time I put my shoes on and I'm like, I got me a remote control. I got it. And I have no idea, because when I was reaching for this remote control that in my mind I'm fixing to take, then the police bust in and take it. And then later I find out, oh wow, that thing was 2 tons. I had no idea. I thought it was like a pound. And even though I had all those intentions of taking it, I got so dangerous close. If I can show, oh shoot, now I found out there's no way I can do it. Then in many jurisdictions, you can't be prosecuted for that crime. That crime. The crime of coming into the building, some conspiracy stuff that we're going to talk about perhaps, but this crime. If I couldn't, if it was a factual impossibility for me to complete that crime, then it's a defense for an attempt.
How about intent? You could be prosecuted for intent?
Let's talk about that. All right, here's our intent, and here's our action, right? Mens rea, mental intent, actus reus, the actions. Is there a crime if all we have is intent? No. We have to have this convergence of intent and action. Mens rea and actus reus.
Even though that thing was 2 tons. Okay.
Yeah, I have all the intent in the world.
Even though it was 2 tons, and you intended to take it, and you reach for it, that's still an action.
Right, but I could not have completed that crime. And if I can show that, if I can show, I didn't say it wasn't going to result in an arrest or even a prosecution, but as a defense to that crime. I can say, hey, there's no way I could have done that. So how can I be prosecuted for a crime there's no way I could have committed? Say I was 4 guys driving around trying to find a guy with a bag of money. If I were just going to pull an example out of the top of my head. If that sounds awfully familiar, those guys had all the intent in the world, but they couldn't complete that crime. Why? He wasn't even there. Yeah, he was a 2-ton remote control. There's no way they could have committed that crime because he didn't walk down the street with money that day. So if you can't be convicted of that crime, then you can't be convicted of this crime because there's just no way. It's a factual impossibility. All right, our next class, we're going to talk about conspiracies and solicitation. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.